Welcome to Reddit Storyline. Some relationships don't collapse overnight. They slowly crack under pressure, under doubt, under things that don't quite make sense at first, until one day everything just shatters all at once, and you're left wondering how you didn't see it sooner. Because today's story isn't just about cheating. It's about confusion, manipulation, and something that feels almost psychological. Jessica was 35 years old, married for over 10 years to a man named Mark, and together they had built what most people would describe as a stable, normal, even happy life, with 2 young kids, a house, routines, and the kind of quiet comfort that comes from knowing someone for that long. There were no major fights, no obvious cracks, no signs that anything was wrong. Until one day, completely out of nowhere, Jessica received a message from Mark while he was at work. It wasn't a loving message, or even a neutral one. It was cold, short, and strangely aggressive. He told her she was lazy. At first, she thought it had to be a joke, or maybe he was having a bad day, because it didn't sound like him at all, and it didn't fit with the man she knew, so she brushed it off and didn't respond in a serious way. But then another message came. And then another. Each one harsher than the last. He started telling her she was a terrible mother, that he regretted marrying her, that she didn't deserve him, and the tone kept escalating in a way that felt completely disconnected from reality. Now here's where things started to feel deeply unsettling, because every single time Mark came home from work, he was completely normal. Not distant. Not cold. Not irritated. He would walk in, smile, kiss her, ask about her day, play with the kids, sit down for dinner like nothing had happened, like those messages didn't exist at all. And that contrast, it started to mess with her head. Because how do you process someone being cruel through a screen, but warm and loving in person, within the same day? At first, she thought maybe he was venting, maybe something was stressing him out at work, but the messages didn't stop, and over time they became more personal, more targeted, more hurtful, like whoever was writing them knew exactly where to hit. And that's when Jessica finally confronted him. She showed him the messages directly, expecting either an explanation, an apology, or at least some acknowledgement. But instead, Mark looked at her phone, and his reaction wasn't anger, it wasn't defensiveness, it wasn't even denial in the usual sense. He looked confused. Genuinely confused. He asked her what messages she was talking about, and when she showed him, he just stared at them like he was seeing them for the first time, like none of it made sense to him. And that reaction threw her off completely. Because if he was lying, he was doing it in a way that didn't feel normal. He didn't look guilty. He looked unsettled. Almost scared. So now Jessica found herself stuck between 2 possibilities that both felt wrong. Either her husband was gaslighting her in an extremely convincing way, or something else was happening. But what? The messages kept coming over the following weeks, sometimes during the day, sometimes late at night when he said he was working overtime, and every time she confronted him, the same pattern repeated. Confusion. Denial. No real explanation. Eventually, the emotional weight of it became too much to handle, because being insulted constantly by someone you love while they pretend everything is fine in person starts to distort your sense of reality. So one day, she reached her breaking point. She packed her things, took the kids, and left to stay with her parents, hoping that distance would at least give her clarity. But even after leaving, the messages didn't stop. They kept coming from the same number, with the same tone, the same cruelty, and now they carried a different kind of edge, mocking her for leaving, telling her she would come back, calling her weak. At that point, Jessica didn't just feel hurt. She felt like she was losing control of the situation entirely. So she decided to go to the police. And this is where everything shifted. Because the police were able to track the phone that Mark claimed he had lost some time ago. They found its location. And when Jessica got that address, something about it felt familiar. So she drove there. And the moment she recognized the house, her stomach dropped. Because she had been there before. It belonged to one of Mark's co-workers. A woman named Emily. Someone Jessica knew. Someone she trusted. Someone who had been in her home, smiled at her, talked to her like a friend. So now the situation wasn't just confusing. It was personal. Jessica confronted Mark again, but this time with something concrete, something he couldn't easily dismiss. And under that pressure, the truth started to come out. Not all at once, but enough. He admitted that Emily wasn't just a coworker. She was someone he had been involved with for over a year. An affair that had been hidden, layered under lies, normal routines, and everyday life. And suddenly, everything started to make sense in the worst possible way. Emily knew details about Jessica's life because Mark had told her. She knew when he was at work. She knew when it was safe to send messages without getting caught. She knew exactly what to say to hurt her. And those messages, they weren't random. They were deliberate. Calculated. Designed to break her down slowly. Now the only question that remained was one Jessica couldn't fully answer. Was Mark completely unaware of what Emily was doing with his old phone? Or had he simply chosen not to see it? Because at some point, ignorance starts to feel like a decision. And honestly, by then, it didn't matter anymore. Because the trust was gone. Completely. Jessica made the decision to file for divorce. Not just because of the affair, but because of everything surrounding it, the deception, the manipulation, the fact that someone had been allowed into their lives who was capable of something this disturbing. And the part that stayed with her the most wasn't even the cheating itself. It was the realization that someone could sit across from you, smile, act like they care about you, and at the same time be actively trying to destroy your sense of self. So now I want to ask you, do you think Mark really didn't know what was happening, or do you think he knew more than he admitted? Welcome back to Reddit Storyline. Some family situations are complicated, some are uncomfortable, and some force you into decisions you never thought you'd have to make, especially when it comes to protecting the people you love. Laura had spent years away from her family, not because she wanted to, but because life had taken her in a direction she never expected, including an abusive marriage abroad that made things even more difficult due to legal restrictions that kept her and her son separated from the rest of the family for a long time. So when she finally had the opportunity to come back home for Christmas, it meant more to her than anyone could probably understand, because it wasn't just a holiday. It was the first time her 18-year-old son, Ethan, would meet the family in person. This was supposed to be a moment of connection, of rebuilding, of creating memories that had been delayed for years. But almost immediately after arriving, something felt off. Her brother's wife, Rachel, had a personality that was hard to ignore, not in a positive way, but in a way that made people uncomfortable without always being able to explain exactly why. She made comments that crossed boundaries, often sexual in nature, sometimes directed at people in the room, sometimes disguised as jokes. And although others seemed to brush it off or laugh awkwardly, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something about it wasn't normal. It wasn't just one comment. It was constant. A pattern. And over time, those patterns start to matter. There had even been moments in the past where Rachel's behavior went beyond words, like the time she took off her bra and threw it at Laura as a joke, something that made everyone uncomfortable but was quickly dismissed. And that was the problem. Everything was always dismissed, ignored, minimized. So Laura tolerated it for the sake of keeping peace in the family, convincing herself that it wasn't worth creating conflict, especially after everything she had already been through in her life. But this time, it was different. Because this time, her son was there, and after the visit ended, Ethan finally opened up about how uncomfortable he had felt the entire time. At first, it was subtle. He mentioned comments Rachel had made, things that didn't feel appropriate, invitations that didn't make sense coming from someone in her position, suggestions that crossed lines in a way that left him confused more than anything else. She had told him to visit her house, to meet her married friends, to hang out in situations that felt clearly inappropriate, and she had made comments about dancing for him, filming videos, even joking about involving his girlfriend in a way that seemed designed to create tension. And even then, Ethan hesitated to tell his mother everything. Because he was embarrassed. Because he didn't want to create problems. Because sometimes it's easier to stay quiet than to confront something uncomfortable. But eventually, more details came out. And those details changed everything. Because Rachel hadn't just made comments. She had touched him. On his thigh. On his back. In ways that made him uncomfortable enough to remember clearly, but conflicted enough not to speak about immediately. And when Laura heard that, something inside her broke. Not gradually. Instantly. Because at that moment, it stopped being about awkward behavior or inappropriate jokes. It became about boundaries being crossed. And more importantly, about her responsibility as a parent. She went to her family, expecting concern, support, maybe even outrage. But instead, she was met with hesitation. With doubt. With phrases like "slow down" and "don't jump to conclusions." And that reaction hurt in a way that was deeper than she expected. Because it made her feel like she wasn't being taken seriously, like her concerns were being minimized, like the situation was being reframed as an overreaction instead of something that needed attention. Even worse, some comments felt personal, like attempts to undermine her credibility by comparing her to her mother, knowing it would affect her emotionally. So Laura did what she felt she had to do. She confronted her brother directly. She told him what had happened, how his wife had behaved, how it had affected her son. And instead of concern, he became defensive. Dismissive. Almost angry. Suddenly, the focus shifted. It wasn't about Rachel anymore. It was about Laura. About her tone. Her reaction. Her words. The narrative flipped in a way that left her feeling isolated, like she was the one causing damage. Like she was the one breaking the family apart. And now she found herself facing a decision that no parent ever wants to make. Protect her child and risk losing her family, or stay silent and maintain the illusion of peace. Because sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't feel like a clear victory. Sometimes it just feels like loss in a different direction. So now I want to ask you, do you think Laura handled this the right way, or would you have done something differently?